of a Linear Circle by Flamethrower. Book 1, Chapter 1, 1971. It's not so bad, Lily says. Severus tries to smile for her, but even he knows that it's a miserable failure. You don't know what it's going to be like. And you haven't been here before. You just have your mom's nonsense to go to. Lily returns, grinning at him. She's been right about everything else, Severus mutters. Yeah, but I was flying before I got a wand, and you weren't, so there. Lily shoves a book into his hands and skips off when the Gryffindor prefect named Pruitt waves for the straggler to hurry up. Severus watches her go and sighs before he joins the others heading downstairs. Malfoy greeted him, but that had been the words of someone who did it because they were supposed to, not because they meant it. Severus is good at watching out for those, he thinks. Maybe Lucius Malfoy is just very bad at it. Severus decides to reserve judgment. He's only known the older kid for an hour. It takes him almost as long to realize that he hates the dormitories. The bed is fine and the dungeons are fine, but the other boys in his room could stand to go drown in the lake outside. He waits until the curtains are closed around each bed before he grabs the book Lily gave him and creeps back out into the common room, which is thankfully empty. Severus is not used to sleeping well, not when he spends half the night listening to it for his father to go to sleep before he dares to relax. Lily asked him once, on promise of complete secrecy, if Severus is afraid of his father because of private things. Severus was so surprised by the question that he honestly answered no, he just didn't like being a Burke's random drunken punching bag. Then he got to be indignant that Lily thought he was afraid of his dad. He is, actually, even if he'll never admit it out loud. Not even magic will stop Tobias Snape, not when his mum was dumb enough to tell his father everything about magic, including the rules, so he wouldn't immediately run off for a divorce when she finally confessed that she was a witch. Severus had firmly put that down as dating rule number 1. Only date other witches or wizards or whoever it was he decided he liked. If he liked? He's not sure that's an option, but he doesn't want to ask. He definitely does not want to listen to Eileen Prince Snape rant off about bloodlines and lineage again. Just in case there are still older Slytherins roaming around, Severus finds a chair in a darker corner of the room. He's used to reading without a decent light, too. Lily gave him a Muggle book, a novel. Inside the front flap of the heavy paper cover is a note in her handwriting. We're in Hogwarts and still we live in different houses. Not a thing's changed at all, except you can take your time reading this one because I read it first. Then you can tell me every single reason why it's wrong, wrong, wrong. Love, Lily. What are you reading? Severus nearly throws the book over the back of the armchair in surprise. The chair rocks up on its back legs before coming down with a heavy thud on all 4 legs again. He stares at the portrait on the wall, which is merely watching him, one eyebrow lifted. Right, Mum warned him about the portraits. Severus just didn't expect any of the magical portraits to talk to him. Worse, the portrait is asking about the book, a Muggle book. Severus shouldn't even have it in the common room. It could... He's not a pureblood. The others might find out. I don't bite, the portrait says when Severus doesn't speak. I'm canvas. It isn't possible to bite. I just wanted to know what sort of book you had. No one brings books to this corner very often. Severus tries not to let on that his heart is still pounding. It's fiction. I like a good story. Is it good? The portrait asks, and Severus dares to peer closer. The portrait is a man with bronze skin and gray eyes? Hazel eyes? It's hard to tell in the dim light. He has curling brown hair, and his robes are positively antique, even to someone who is already wearing hand-me-downs. The portrait is also wearing a collar that glitters green and matches the robes, though Severus thinks it's a very odd choice. I don't know. I haven't read it yet. Severus swallows and convinces himself that if it's a portrait, a Slytherin portrait, then it knows how to keep its mouth shut, or it can be bribed. Not that he knows how to bribe a portrait, but he does know how to bribe a person. He can find out. It's Muggle fiction, he whispers. So what? Severus blinks a few times. What? So what? The portrait asks. Why does that matter? What's the name of the book? Severus bites his lip before holding out the book for the portrait's inspection. It's this one, he says, feeling like an idiot. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Sounds like someone couldn't decide what they were writing about and just kept throwing topics at paper until it lingered long enough to get picked up by a quill, the portrait said. Fascinating. What can I do to convince you to read it to me? I want to find out which subject the author finally settled on. What? The portrait lifts his eyes from the book's cover to look at Severus. Unless you're willing to stand there holding the book up to this canvas, turning the pages one at a time, I can't exactly read it on my own. I'm a portrait. Being a portrait is exceptionally dull when there is no one in this castle, by the way, and if anyone tells you otherwise, they are either not a portrait or they are lying. How can a portrait find anything dull? Severus finally asks. The man in the portrait tilts his head and then shrinks? No, he isn't shrinking. He's walking backwards, and it changes Severus's perspective. He didn't know a portrait could do that. The portrait spreads his arms, gesturing at his surroundings. It's a house, a real and very old house. There are windows with a garden visible behind them. It's night in the portrait's garden, too. The much smaller man is in a sitting room, painted to scale, that has wooden shelves on the wall filled with tiny painted books. There is a wooden chair on a stone floor, and a stone archway is painted on both sides of the room. I've read every single book painted into this canvas. That was a long time ago. I see, Severus says, even though he really doesn't. The portrait sighs. I can't leave the Slytherin Common Room. Actually, I can't leave this portrait. It wasn't designed for that sort of freedom. You're one of the only people to speak to me in... The portrait pauses. What year is it? 1971. 1st September 1971. 10 years since someone decided I was worth speaking to beyond random bits of acknowledgement, and that usually doesn't last long. When Severus says nothing, the portrait sighs. Go back to your dormitory. Go to bed. Severus is so used to obeying an adult speaking in that tone that he does so without question. He's already climbing back into bed, tucking Lily's book under his pillow, when he realizes he didn't say anything at all. It takes him a week to muster up enough courage to return to that dark corner of the common room with the Muggle book. He hasn't been able to read a word of it. It also takes that long for the room to be free of other spying Slytherins, but Severus is honest with himself. The delay is mostly him. When he creeps over to the corner the next Wednesday evening, the man is about half size, at least from Severus's perspective. He's seated in the chair, which is propped back on its rear legs while the man holds it in place with his boot plate pressed against the wall. Something black that also glitters like green gold is twining around his hands. Hello, Tiny Snape. Severus almost drops the book. I never told you my name, he says defensively. No, but I have ears. I've heard others in this room use that name to gain your attention. Okay, it's a fair point. What's your name, then? Severus asks. The man frowns. You know, no one has asked me for my name in 100 years. That's really stupid. And rude, Severus adds. You get used to it after a while, the portrait says. Severus thinks the man is lying. No one gets used to being ignored. My name is Nizar Slytherin, Tiny Snape. Salazar is my older brother. Severus gapes at the painting. I didn't know Salazar Slytherin had a brother. I imagine there's a lot about Salazar that no one knows, chooses to remember, or wishes to discuss at all, Nizar mutters. Besides, I'm stuffed into a corner. How is anyone supposed to know that I exist? I guess they wouldn't. There should be a nameplate on the bottom of the frame. I can't exactly peer out of here and see if it's still there, Nizar says. Severus double-checks to make sure the room is still empty before he whispers, Lumos, and holds his wand close to the portrait's aged, heavy wooden frame. There is a plaque, he tells the portrait. The first letter, the N, that's still here, but maybe a blasting hex, he guesses? Slytherin is still visible, though. People should know about you. I wasn't a founder. The first generation of teachers never really get mentioned in the history books, Nizar says. It's a shame, really. We did as much work as Helga, Godric, Rowena, or Salazar, but the way scribes jabber on, you'd think 4 magicians taught several hundred children every year all by themselves. You're amazing, Severus says, and then flushes with embarrassment. He hadn't meant to say that out loud. Thank you, Nizar replies, and he doesn't sound sarcastic, cruel, or uncaring about it at all. He says it the way Lily does, like he means it. I'm afraid I am otherwise not that useful or interesting. I remember my brother. I remember teaching, but portraits? I think we're not meant to remember 1,000 years, Tiny Snape. Severus. My name is Severus. Nizar isn't trying to be rude, but Severus isn't tiny. Severus. Mutilated Latin. To sever. Nizar looks thoughtful. I think I knew a magician with that name once, but I don't recall much. I do remember that he was very talented. Perhaps you will share in that trait. Severus blushes again. I want to, he admits. I want to be great. He wants his mother to look at him as something other than a mistake. He wants Lily to understand him. He desperately wants Petunia to leave him the bloody hell alone. I'll make you a deal, the portrait says. It's interesting the way his speech patterns shift back and forth between the way kids in Hogwarts talk now and the way they might have spoken hundreds of years ago. You may come and speak to me whenever you want. I don't pass on secrets, Severus Snape. No one notices I exist most of the time. Who would I even tell? Why are you offering me that? This has to be a trap. It's always a trap. This is the most anyone has talked to Severus since the sorting, aside from Lily. They can only manage stolen moments between classes, or evenings out on the ground where they can be away from other students who say terrible things about house traitors. They're both trying. He is trying, but Severus really hoped Lily would be in Slytherin too. Nizar lets his wooden chair drop back down to the ground. Unlike Severus's incident with his chair last week, that one makes almost no sound. Whenever you enter the common room, you always look behind you, as if you're waiting for someone to join you, and they never do. I hate seeing that look on the faces of the first years. It means they have friends in Hogwarts who will never be welcome in this room. You were watching me? Severus hisses in outrage. Nizar seems surprised by that. I watch everyone, Severus. My brother founded this house, but it is also my house. You're all my tiny serpents, and I will always watch and assist you however I can. Sorry, Severus murmurs, hanging his head. He should have guessed. Nizar Slytherin did say that being a portrait was dull. So far, you've not done a thing to warrant that sort of apology. Are you sure you're a Slytherin? Severus asks, scowling. Nizar smiles. How many confirmations of accuracy do you want? Fine. I... Nizar Slytherin, Severus repeats, trying to make it real. The plaque was blackened, but it still said Slytherin. What does that mean? Technically, the family name was Casa de Deslizas, but the languages in the north, well, if you gave a Castilian name to someone speaking the old Celtic tongues, it was often slurred into Slytherin. After a few years of it just becoming a worse and worse habit, we gave up and went with it. My full name is Nizar Hervalt de Leon, Casa de Deslizas de Castilla y Moravia. The portrait looks like he's biting back a smile. It didn't help to ditch part of the syllables Satin compacted into Deslizas either. Nizar Hervalt is half Euskarian and half Germanic, so no one slaughtered that one. It means little war leader. Severus smiles. Well, if you ignore my last name, my name just means severed prince. To his surprise, Nizar saddens. No parent should use their child's name as a weapon against another. That's not it at all, Severus exclaims, and then remembers to lower his voice when another portrait on the other side of the room mumbles in sleepy protest about the noise. My apologies. Nizar has returned his attention to the glittering black ribbon in his hands. That was impolite of me. Sometimes I see things clearly just for a moment, and then it's gone again. It's okay, Severus manages to say, even with his throat too tight. He knows that the portrait is correct. He just didn't want to hear someone else confirm what he's suspected for the last few years. It's still not anywhere near as fab as what your name means. Fab? Nizar looks confused. Fabulous, Severus explains, trying to figure out how to hide in his robes. That one is far more muggle than wizard, and he needs to stop using it. Oh, the slang is shifting again. That will be interesting. Just don't ask me to tell you of slang from Shakespeare's time, Severus. Why not, Severus asks. Nizar raises an eyebrow. Because I'm a teacher, and you are 11. Severus frowns. You can't stop me from going to look it up in the library. You're right, I can't, can I? Nizar smirks at him. Oh, that was a gift. Severus isn't used to anything that roundabout, but he isn't stupid either. Do you still want to hear the book? Nizar's hazel eyes light up. If you don't mind, and if you don't neglect to sleep. Severus thinks about it. Only one chapter each night. That's reasonable, isn't it? Yes. You want something else, too. Nizar seems pleased. Excellent, Tiny Slytherin. What do you want in exchange? Severus lowers his eyes. This might be asking for too much. My only friend is a Gryffindor. I don't have any friends in Slytherin because I won't stop being friends with her. Would you talk to me like you said last week? That isn't really a balanced bargain. Hold on. Nizar stands up and walks forward so that the perspective shift makes him look larger again. It's really, really interesting to watch. That's not a ribbon, Severus whispers in delight. That's a snake. Her name is Kanza. Nizar holds out his hands so that Severus can get a good look at the black snake twining around his fingers. She has a black belly with gray stripes at each junction of her belly scales, and her eyes are oval hints of pale green paint. Otherwise, she is solid black, except for that odd green-gold glittering layer. Hey, she was around your neck last time, Severus blurts out, and then feels stupid again. Nizar nods. She was. It's her favorite place, not least of which because it means she is mistaken for jewelry. Vipers like to be underestimated. Fab, Severus whispers, temporarily forgetting to stop using that word. How do you know she likes that? Nizar pauses, like he's trying not to grimace, before he lets out an odd hissing sound. Oh, Severus stares at the portrait. You're a parcel mouth. And you're not running, Nizar smiles. Excellent. Why would I run? Severus asks in disbelief. Salazar was a parcel mouth. Do you remember when I mentioned that it had been 10 years since someone spoke to me? Nizar lets the black snake climb up his green robe sleeve, where she twines herself around his neck again. When she holds completely still, she does look just like the collar Severus mistook her for. Yeah? That particular student wished for me to prove that I was Salazar Slytherin's brother. So I did. Nizar sighs. Parsimals are not looked on fondly anymore. Were they ever? Severus wants to know, curious. Yes, we were. Nizar returns to his chair. But you mentioned a book, and we made a bargain. Pay up, Slytherin. Oddly enough, Severus doesn't mind paying him. Severus sneaks into the common room every night it's empty to read Lily's book aloud to a portrait. Nizar treats Severus like he's a person of worth, someone valuable. Lily and her parents are the only other people who do that, and it warms him on the nights the dungeon dormitories feel too cold and too empty. Nizar thinks it's funny that a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe are all three the book's primary subjects. Severus's only complaint with the book so far is that he wants to hex all of the older siblings for not believing the youngest. He had to look after his toddler cousins on occasion before his father drove away that part of the family. 4-year-old muggles don't make up things like fawns, though Severus doesn't blame the other siblings for being fed up with the idea of tea parties. I wonder if it was a magician who wrote this, Nizar said when the talking beavers show up. We've already covered vanishing cabinets, the wardrobe, a dark witch, charmed weather, and mythological creatures, Severus replies. It wouldn't surprise me. No, wait. Father Christmas just turned up. Nizar starts laughing. When was this book written? 1950, Severus tells him, after finding the copyright date. Oh, I suppose I can't blame the 1800s then, can I? Why? What did the 1800s do? Severus asks, lowering the book for a moment. They were kind enough to present us with Edgar Allan Poe, Oscar Wilde, Jules Verne, Alexander Dumas, multiple Bronte sisters, and Lewis Carroll, most of whom I've never heard read. They have to be entertaining, though, considering how often their works incited students into frothing rages and arguments over who was taking which intoxicants while writing. Severus narrows his eyes. After what I read about Shakespeare last week, I'm not sure I want to go look for any of that. If they're all Muggle authors, he has to wait for the summer anyway. Nizar grins. And what did you learn about Shakespeare? That he really needed to get out more, Severus mutters, which for some reason sets Nizar off into a near hysterical fit of laughter. Severus judges him for being an odd portrait. Severus finally has to give the book back to Lily when its story is done. What did you think of it? She asks him while thumbing through the pages. It was normal until Father Christmas showed up, Severus says, which makes Lily laugh too. Maybe the problem is that he only knows odd people. Wardrobes that send people to other worlds are normal, Lily teases him. This means that Severus spends the rest of their free evening after dinner trying to explain vanishing cabinets. Severus goes to the library on the edge of curfew, glaring at the library's meager selection of novels. None of the names the portrait mentioned are here except for Lewis Carroll, whose book has a picture of a rabbit in a waistcoat on the front. Brought you another one, Severus says later that night. Alice in Wonderland. If it's horrible, I'm blaming you. No, you should blame Lewis Carroll, Nizar says, smirking. I didn't write the book. You're weird, Severus retorts. I'm a Slytherin, and so are you. That means you are also by association what? Nizar asks. Severus scowls at him. Shut up, is his brilliant rebuttal. They're in the midst of Chapter 6 when Severus stops and glares at the portrait. Are you sure you haven't read this before? But I don't want to go among mad people, indeed. Yes, Nizar replies crossly. If I had money, I'd wager you he was a Ravenclaw. Why do you think that? Wizard is an easy guess. Muggle fiction doesn't have a home in Hogwarts library. Absinthe, Nizar mutters, which makes no sense at all. Besides, how many riddles and analogies has this Carroll fellow crammed into this book so far? Severus gave up counting after the first chapter. A lot. The next book is wizarding fiction, since that's what the library has, and Severus doesn't think he's ready for anything else Carroll wrote, not yet. He might be dead before that happens. It's safer to have wizarding books in the dormitories too, though it's not as interesting as Muggle fiction. That relies on imagination, where wizards tend to fix everything with magic before any kind of story has a chance to happen. Severus has no intention of going home over winter break, though Lily does. He gives her what spare change he has until more arrives in a Christmas card, maybe, and asks Lily to buy whatever that will get him that isn't wizarding boredom, as long as it isn't Lewis Carroll. You read Alice in Wonderland, didn't you? Lily asks. Severus made a face. He is such a Ravenclaw. There's a sequel, Lily tells him, and giggles at the horrified noise he makes in response. When she comes back from break, she brings him a pile of used books that are worth far more than the pittance he gave her. It was Christmas. Mom and Dad got some too, and so did I, Lily says, kissing his cheek. Happy holidays and happy birthday, Burke. Yeah, Severus hands over the sealed file that's been burning a hole in his pocket since the 5th of January. Happy Christmas and happy birthday. It's really pretty, Lily says of the gold liquid. Severus glances around and then leans close to her ear. It's Felix Felicis, he whispers. Severus! Shh, Severus says, clamping his hand over her mouth. Lily! Mm-hmm. Lily waits until Severus moves his hand. But Professor Slughorn says this takes 6 months to make. If you're really bad at it, maybe, Severus replies. Yes, I really did make it. I didn't steal it from that moron. I'd be too worried it was poison instead of the real thing. Thank you, Seth. Though I'm not sure what I need liquid luck for, Lily says. Not wizarding professional sports, organizations, exams, or to influence the Wizengamot. Otherwise, you just pick something. It won't go off as long as you don't remove the stopper until you're ready to use it. If you can't think of anything for 6 years, who cares? Lily smiles and hugs him. Severus is glad she likes it, even if he's blundered. He has no idea how to top Felix Felicis for the next time he needs a gift. He just wanted to see if he could brew it, which Slughorn said no one could until they were properly trained. Why is his head of house an idiot? He asks Nizar the same question. Because he's one of the very few Slytherins your headmaster trusts hasn't joined with Voldemort. Severus flinches. Please don't say that name. Fear of a name lends that man credibility, tiny Slytherin. Don't fear his name. Fear what the name is attached to. Severus looks up. You knew him? Nizar nods. Not personally. He always thought himself too good to talk to a mere portrait. Arrogant little dust mote. I'll still be hanging here when he's dead and gone, most likely. The older Slytherins. Some of them think Voldemort is some kind of wizarding savior for magical blood. Nizar rolls his eyes. They said the same of Grindelwald, and look how well that turned out. When Severus brings down one of the used non-fiction books Lily's parents got for him, this one based on the legend of King Arthur, the result is 6 weeks of listening to Nizar Slytherin rant about historical inaccuracies, how Merlin was really not all that great, and what is this romantic nonsense anyway? They have Arthur married to his grandniece? Are they out of their minds? Nizar exclaims. Severus laughs, and then quickly smothers the sound to avoid noise. End of chapter.